to demonstrate, when I looked at P75 and Codex Vaticanus, that while these two manuscripts are extremely close to one another in their readings, they are not copies of one another. They have different readings. And therefore, because you have that happening not just with them, but with other manuscripts as well, the issue is you have multiple lines. Dr. Ehrman keeps presenting it like it's the phone game, where you have one copy of one copy of one copy of one copy in a straight line, adding up all these errors. That's not how it worked. Not only did they sometimes have multiple copies, you sometimes had scriptoriums where people were reading, and so you'd have one copy, and sometimes they would switch the copy in between, and so on and so forth, so you have text with mixed textual nature to them. It's much more complicated than that, and there are multiple lines of transmission. So the idea that, well, you know, if there was these primitive corruptions before the manuscript tradition is found in history, therefore we can never know what the originals were. When you have multiple lines, how do all those multiple lines end up having the same readings in them? Not identical readings, but it's still the same New Testament. It's still teaching the same things. He also did not understand whatsoever the graphics that I put up, where I asked a computer program to compare for us two different texts, the Westcott and Hort text and the Byzantine Majority Platform text. I was not saying that there was 95% agreement in comparing manuscripts. In fact, I said clearly, roll the tape back and listen. I said very clearly, we are looking at printed texts here. That is, what does the Byzantine manuscript tradition look like? What does the Alexandrian look like? And let's compare them at various places using computer technology to do so. And I gave you the exact number. It's just under 6,600 differences between the majority text and the modern critical text. That's a number. Put it into the math for yourself. It's about 95% agreement. There's about a 4.7% variation between those printed collations. I try to be very clear about that. Dr. Ehrman has misunderstood what I was saying, calling it a completely bogus argument. He has simply misunderstood what it is that I was saying. Now, I would like to take your attention back to the examples that he just gave. Mark 1:41. Dr. Ehrman believes he knows the original. He believes it is the reading of Codex Bezae Cantabrigiensis, Codex D. Even though people like Holland and Metzger and even Dr. Parker have pointed out that when Bezae is alone against the earlier manuscript tradition, that it probably should not be given much weight. Only when it agrees with the earlier tradition should it be given weight in those situations. Again, I presented a paper on that earlier today. We looked at the bloody sweat. He didn't mention Hebrews 2:9, but I will, because he believes he knows what the original there is too, the unique God, monogenes theos at John 1:18. He actually, at that point, takes, I think, a rather unusual view. I think it would be a great thing that many people have disagreed with him on this particular reading. The majority today believe that monogenes theos, unique God, is the best reading at that point. The Comma Johanneum, no serious textual scholar believes that it has any viability as being original. It is not even a part of the New Testament manuscript tradition, 1 John 5:7, until maybe the 15th century at the earliest. It comes over from the Latin very, very clearly. It is not a viable variant at that particular point. Each one of these variants, I've mentioned many. Sitting over there on my desk, I have the NA27 NET diglot. And we make that available. I encourage people to purchase that so that you can look at the textual evidence yourself. And you will see these various variants. You'll be able to see what the manuscript evidence is. And here's the point. If the standard is that there can be no disagreement for the Bible to be the authoritative Word of God, and these are things that Dr. Ehrman has said. He even made sure at the end of the radio program just a few weeks ago in London, probably sitting in the same studio I sat in November on the same program, to insert into the discussion his thesis statement that will look, how can this be the authoritative Word of God when we don't know what it originally said? What he's saying is, if scholars can disagree, then it's impossible to know what it originally said. No, I say, let everybody know what the variants are, look at how it would impact the meaning of the text, and recognize that none of the New Testament books are changed by any of these readings. That's why I challenge Dr. Ehrman. Show us where your reading of Hebrews 2:9 changes Hebrews as a book. Show us where reading angry at Mark 1:41 changes the meaning of the Gospel of Mark. When do any of these, John clearly presents the deity of Christ in multiple places, whether John 1:18 reads theos or huios. Where do any of these actually do what Dr. Ehrman says, change an entire book of the Bible? He has said that many, many times. I must say to you that his opening statement is a statement that I've heard at least 25 times myself. Because I've listened to all of his classes, I've listened to all of his debates. Over on my table, I have all of his books, including his doctoral dissertation and his Brill compilation of all of his scholarly writings. I don't get the feeling that Dr. Ehrman has looked at anything that I've written on this subject whatsoever. And that has led, unfortunately, to his rebuttal being filled primarily with a misunderstanding of what I actually presented to you. And I'm sorry for that. But the fact of the matter is, here's the issue that we must get to in the cross-examination. Does he or does he not agree with Kurt and Barbara Allen, Dan Wallace, and others who believe in the tenacity of the text? That is, that once a reading enters into the text, it stays there, even if it's silly. He loves to tell the story of manuscript 109, where the scribe copied across columns in the genealogy of Jesus and ended up really making everything pretty messy because he just, I don't know if he was asleep, needed contact lenses or something, I don't know, but he made a mess. But it's still there. There are nonsense readings in the manuscript tradition. They stay there. We still have them. That means the original readings are still there as well. Now, are there a small number of places where we have to look at those variants? And sometimes when it seems like the internal and external evidence is very, very close, should we not do exactly what modern Bible translators have done and put notes in the column that say, some early manuscripts say this and some early manuscripts say this? Those of you who've ever heard me preach know that when I preach on something like that, I raise those issues. I don't believe that Christians should be, quote-unquote, protected from those things because there's no reason to do so. That has been part and parcel of my emphasis all along. And so, do the original readings continue to exist to this day? That's the first question. And is the standard that is being presented this evening reasonable? I submit to you that if your standard is that God is supposed to somehow strike scribes dead before they make a mistake, or somehow work some sort of miracle where they want to write one word because they don't know really how to spell the word, and all of a sudden their hand is taken over and they're writing something else, I suggest to you that is unreasonable. It is not scholarly. There is no grounds for it. And I wasn't trying to lull you into not thinking by presenting to you a very different way of understanding how the New Testament has been preserved.